Hi, it's Paul Antonelli here. Welcome to another episode of the Ideal Business Podcast. Today I'm sitting in the Finke Gorge National Park, which is not far, a couple of hours outside of Alice. And this is one of the oldest river courses, unchanged river courses in the world, close to 300 million years old. And it's a great four-wheel drive track and some amazing camping to do. What I wanted to talk about today was a little bit about perspective in your business, perspective. And it sort of came across to me because we've been doing quite a bit of this, outback camping in quite remote areas. And one of the things that, like this particular location here, we spend quite a bit of time. Most of the actual track itself through the gorge is in the riverbed. And when you're in the riverbed, you can only really see what's close to you, what's around you, what's in front of you, what's behind you. You don't really get any sense of perspective. And so when you're trying to navigate this type of track from the riverbed itself, you sort of just have to follow the riverbed, sort of go with the flow. And we also, about 3 or 4 days ago, we camped at another location where there was another water hole, and we went for a bit of a walk in the morning around just after sunrise. And as we walked, we couldn't get much of a sense of where we were, and then I suggested that we climb up on top of a ridge, which we did. Once we got up on the ridge, you could actually, it's a completely different view of the landscape and a completely different view of what's around and which direction to go, and potentially, if we're looking for a different campsite or a location, you can see things very, very, very differently. So what does this matter? Well, perspective is really important. One of the biggest challenges as business owners when we're too close to everything, which means we're in the riverbed, if you make the analogy, is that you're just in the riverbed, you're focused on what's ahead of you, you can see what's been behind you, and immediately what's going on. The problem with that approach is, so is everyone else in the business. Everyone else operates in the riverbed. That's where the action is, that's where things take place. But it doesn't give you very good perspective. It doesn't give you a good sense of what's ahead. It doesn't give you an ability to see different options. And so one of the tricks to do, or one of the important things to try to achieve as business owners, is to get out of the riverbed. And it's hard. I've worked with many clients, and one of the biggest challenges in getting out of the riverbed, in getting some perspective, is they're too tied up in too many of the operational activity. Because the riverbed, you'd sort of make the analogy as being where it operates, where your business operates, where things happen. So part of the process is firstly to just be aware that when you're in the operation of the business and you're dealing with activity that's happening, whether it's day-to-day activity, you're really moving along the riverbed, and you don't necessarily have the perspective or the high-level overview that would be more beneficial, particularly as the business owner, as the founder of the business. It's really, really important that you provide that insight. And so one of the things to always consider is, when you're spending too much time at this level in the riverbed at a low altitude, actually doing it pretty tough. The riverbeds tends to be a tough location to be, is to see how you can maybe step back a bit and get a bit more perspective. How do you get up higher? How do you get up to a higher location or higher altitude so you can get a really good view of where you're at, where your business is at, what's ahead, where have you been, with a bit of perspective rather than just close behind you. And it does change a bit of a scene. And so the way I'd make the analogy of the getting up out of the riverbed is to think about, it is a high level overview of your business. It's about being able to see further into the future, because once you get up higher, and if you've done this yourself, you get up on a range, you get up on a mountain, you get up on a large hill, you can just see a greater distance, and you can see further into the future, and sometimes you can see what's ahead. Is there something, some obstacle that might cause some issues? Is there something that needs attention, even though it's not upon you yet? An example which we looked at when we climbed up on the riverbed, we were able to see up on that range. We went for a walk. We were able actually to see a very sandy river crossing that we needed to make further down the track, and so then we were able to plan for it a little bit. We didn't have to go into too much detail. We just knew it was coming and whereabouts it would be located, and maybe we'd allow ourselves a little bit more time. So what's the difference when you look at activity that relates to being in the riverbed and activity that relates to being up on the high point, on the high ground? What's the difference? The riverbed activity, as I mentioned before, is day-to-day operations, dealing with fires that might take place, activity that you may have actually developed yourself, and it's stuff that you've done in the business for many years. It's not necessarily making the business go forward or grow or expand or evolve. It's more about just doing more of the same type of stuff, more of the same type of activity. And so if you're doing most of your time is spent on that type of activity, then you're spending most of your time within the riverbed. Now, the difference is if you can actually get up on high ground, and the first thing to be aware of in this analogy is the concept that there exists a riverbed, and then there is a range, and there is a high point, and just knowing that there's a difference between the two is an awareness that will assist in your thinking. When you can get to the high ground, the problem with the high ground, getting to the high ground, and it exists out in this sort of landscape as well, is that it's not easy. It's way easier just to follow the riverbed. It's way easier. You know, you're at the lowest point. Typically riverbeds are at the lowest altitude. They're relatively flat. There might be some soft sand which could slow you down a little bit, but it's actually easier just to follow the riverbed and the course line. And that's, it's sort of like going with the flow a little bit, you know. And these riverbeds that I'm talking about are dry. This is a dry season that we exist at the moment, where we are at the moment. So it's actually easier to do that. And then when you look at, if you look behind me, there's a bit of a high point, this range that runs behind us. The first thing that you look at is like, oh, it'd be a great perspective out there, but how do I get up there? How do you get up there? How do you actually get up on top of that range? It's never that easy getting up out of the low points and getting up to a point of altitude. It's just not that easy. Once you've done it a few times, you can work out a bit of a strategy. And it may involve, like some of the stuff that we do, it may involve, you know, for us, when we're doing this process, getting out of the car and walking, just doing it on foot. And it's very similar in your own business. It's much more easier just to follow the flow, stay on the riverbed, follow the tracks, the well-worn in tracks, because it's easier. It's a line of least resistance. But there are a lot of benefits for seeking out and getting some altitude to give yourself some perspective. Once you get the altitude and the perspective, the difference of the activity in that zone when you're at that point is that you're actually a little bit reflective of your business. You're looking at where you're at, what's going well, why is that going well, what's not going so well, what about your team, is there team changes that need to take place in the future, what's happening in the marketplace, you know, what's that likely to look like for your business in the next 3 to 6 months, is there opportunities that may be coming up that you could take advantage of if you're well positioned, is there some issues in your business that are preventing you from going to the next level? These are all reflective, high altitude, higher perspective activity. And I'd be proposing that as a founder, as a CEO of your business, you want to get to a point where you can spend at least 30% of your time, in that space, because that's really where it makes a difference. And it's sort of about moving away from the belief that you have to be in the riverbed. You just have to be there. You've always been in the riverbed, you just have to be in the riverbed. There's no real, that's what's enabled you to get the business to where it is now. So you've had this understanding or this belief that You just have to be in the riverbed. But if you can change that perspective, it'll be really beneficial to not only yourself personally, your business, but also your team around you, because they love to know that there's someone looking out what's happening ahead, what's the track ahead, what's going on ahead. And that perspective of what lies ahead and how to develop a bit more of a strategic approach will make a big difference to the business. And so, for example, it might be seasonal activity that's taking place. So there's some market disruption with competitors. There's some pricing pressures that may be coming up. It's very difficult to deal with that activity once you're in the midst of it all on the baseline. It's much easier to get a clearer head, get more perspective, get altitude, and then you can stand back and look across the landscape and have a better picture of what needs to be done. And it is simply by, and I tried to draw this analogy because the headspace, the nature of being at altitude just creates a different frame of mind, a completely different frame of mind. Gives you a perspective and an opportunity to stop. When you're up at the altitude as well, you don't hear the same noise. It's not as noisy. You know, a lot of the things that I'm here down on the ground at the moment on the riverbed, you can hear the wind in the trees, you can hear the birds, you can hear the water flowing, you can hear the track running, you can hear birds all over the place. But when you get up higher, there's less noise. There is less noise up higher because you're up off where the noise takes place and the action takes place. And with less noise comes the opportunity to develop clarity and to step back a little bit from what you're doing in your business and what you maybe need to be doing in the business. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I've spent quite a bit of time over the last 4 months in these type of locations and reflected on how that relates to what we do on a day-to-day basis and what we do in our businesses. And one of the things that I always enjoy, I love being in the riverbed, don't get me wrong. It's where the action is, it's where the fun is. Sometimes you've got to deviate off it, but I also find that having opportunities to get up high, you can't get up high all the time, gives you an opportunity to pause, reflect, check how your progress is going, and have a bit more insight into what's ahead. So yeah, I'd really encourage you to try to get out of the riverbed and get up on those ranges, get up on those high points, and get some perspective, both for your own benefit, for that of your business, and for that of your team around you. Thank you very much for listening. Take care until our next podcast, and ciao for now.